The mountain pass at Keldivar's spine smelled like blood and salt, and Emmett Wells had both running down the side of his face when the tax collectors found him. He had been driving the mule cart since before dawn, 2 barrels of fine Adriatic salt lashed down under oilcloth, 3 smaller crates of black pepper and dried spice mixed wedged between them, all of it purchased fair at the coast market in Voros Harbor, and bound for the inland villages of Creswick and Thornfall. The run paid well because nobody else wanted to do it. The pass was narrow. The cliffs dropped on one side into a churning gray sea 500 feet below. On the other side, the rock face went straight up and gave no shelter from the wind that came screaming off the water in the autumn months. It was brutal work, and it was exactly the kind of work that suited Emmett Wells because it required no conversation and nobody to answer to. He was 28 years old and had the hands of a man 10 years older, cracked at the knuckles, stained by brine and road dust. He was not tall, not particularly broad, built the way a good cartwheel is built, low and solid and made to keep turning when things got rough. Brown hair worn a little long, jaw unshaved because there was no one to shave it for. Gray eyes that had the habit of looking at things directly, which some people found unsettling and most people simply did not notice. The ambush came from the eastern switchback, which told him they had been waiting. 3 riders in the gray and gold livery of Prefect Havorn's Revenue Corps, the kind of livery that meant something legal in the lowland cities, and meant absolutely nothing up here except that the men wearing it felt entitled to everything you had. The lead rider had put a crossbow bolt through the oilcloth covering the first barrel before Emmett even had time to pull the mule to a stop. It had not been aimed at him. It had been a message. The second message had been the butt of a baton across his cheekbone when he stepped down from the cart and asked to see a warrant of seizure. He was sitting in the road now, one hand pressed to his face, watching blood drip onto the stones between his boots, and thinking in the calm, resigned way he always thought when things went badly that he was going to lose the whole cargo and probably the cart and possibly the mule. The salt alone represented 4 months of road profit. He did not have 4 months of road profit sitting spare anywhere. This would be the end of him in this trade. The lead collector, a thick-necked man named Dross who Emmett had encountered twice before on this route, was climbing down from his horse with the particular swagger of a man who had never once doubted his right to do exactly what he was doing. Havorn's new road tax is 30% of assessed cargo value, Dross said, pulling a folded document from his coat and flapping it open. Assessed at market rate by a license collector, which is me. Those barrels of salt look to me like premium coastal grade, which assesses at 12 coin per stone. 2 barrels at 40 stone each is roughly 1,000 coin in value. Your tax is 300 coin payable now, or the cargo is forfeit. Emmett did not have 300 coin, he had 63. The tax at this pass was 12% when I came through 6 weeks ago, Emmett said. It was raised, Dross said pleasantly. Show me the signed decree. Dross looked at him the way a boot looks at a beetle and then kicked the folded document toward him across the road stones. Emmett picked it up. It had Havorn's seal, all right, but the seal was on the wrong corner, pressed at an angle no official scribe would ever accept, and the decree number at the top was lower than the decree number on the 12% order Emmett still carried in his coat. A fake, or at minimum a deliberately backdated forgery. He said so. Dross had raised the baton again. He did not swing it because something very large moved at the edge of Emmett's vision, something that had been sitting in the shadow of the cliff face, and that something stood up. Emmett had not noticed her because she had been absolutely still, sitting with her back against the rock and her legs drawn up, and in the shadow she was nearly invisible. She was an orc, and she was in the kind of shape that meant she had been traveling hard and alone for a long time. She stood up slowly, the way a large, dangerous thing moves when it has decided to move, and the 3 collectors all turned toward her at the same time. She was tall, nearly a head taller than the tallest man present, broad-shouldered in the way that meant real bone and muscle, not armor padding. Her skin was a deep forest green shading toward gray at the jaw and brow, and her tusks were the clean ivory color of someone well-fed and young, not yet 25 by Emmett's guess, curved upward from her lower jaw in two elegant arcs that the autumn light caught sharply. Her hair was black and thick, and she wore it in a single tight braid down her back. Her eyes, when they caught the light, were a warm amber gold that was almost startling against all that green. She was wearing warrior's leathers, and they fit her like they had been made for her specifically, which they probably had. A fitted chest piece of boiled dark leather, lacquered to a dull sheen, cut close across her frame and buckled down the sides with a double row of iron clasps. Below that, snug riding leathers in worn brown that tucked into knee-high boots reinforced at the shin with riveted iron plates. A short cloak hung from her left shoulder on a single ring clasp, deep burgundy oilcloth against the sea wind. A broad sword hung at her left hip in a battered but well-oiled scabbard. She was not wearing the sword as decoration. The way she stood made it clear she had pulled that sword enough times that reaching for it was no more complicated than breathing. She looked at Dross and his baton and the document on the road stones and then at Emmett, and the whole situation seemed to arrange itself in her mind without her having to ask a single question. "Problem," she said. Her voice was lower than most women's voices, with the faint rasp that came from the heavier orc vocal structure, and it carried. "Nothing that concerns you," Dross said. He had backed up half a step, which he probably did not realize he had done. "You hit him," she said. "He resisted a lawful." "You hit him," she said again, in exactly the same tone, and the fact that it was the same tone was somehow worse than if it had been louder. Emmett got to his feet. His face hurt sharply and was going to look ugly by tomorrow, but he was steady. He looked at the orc woman. She was looking at Dross with that flat amber gaze, and Dross was trying to decide something, and the two collectors behind him had their hands very close to their swords in the way that meant they were thinking about it but not committed. Emmett picked up the forged decree off the road and folded it and put it in his coat alongside the older order. He said, "I'm going to drive my cart on through this pass." "You're not," Dross said, but there was something different in his voice now. The orc woman took one step forward, just one. The sound of her boot on the stones was unhurried and enormous. Dross made a decision. He pointed at his two men, snapped his fingers, and they wheeled their horses and rode back toward the eastern switchback at a clip that was faster than casual. Dross himself mounted without ceremony and followed them, and the last Emmett heard of them was hoofbeats on stone echoing off the cliff face and fading. He stood in the empty road with blood on his face and looked at the orc woman. She looked back at him without any particular expression. "Thank you," he said. She said, "I did not do it for you. I dislike men like that." "Fair enough," he said. She sat back down against the rock face in the shadow. Emmett went to the cart, checked the oilcloth, examined the bolt hole in the first barrel. The bolt had punched through but had not hit the salt itself, just opened the wood. He could plug it later. He climbed back onto the cartboard, gathered the reins, and looked back at the orc woman. "The road gets worse ahead," he said. 3 more miles of cliff face, and then the garrison post at Keldavar's gate. Havorn's men staff the garrison. If Dross rides ahead to flag my cargo, which he will, they will stop me there and seize everything. She did not say anything. "There's a shepherd's track that cuts inland at the second switchback," he said. "Longer by half a day, but it avoids the garrison. I am telling you this because you appear to be walking and the shepherd's track is better for walking. The cliff road is not." He paused. "Also, there may be more of Dross's men. I count 4 barrels as better odds than 2. She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. "Merchant," she said. "Spice and salt trader," he said. "Emmett Wells." Something that might have been a very small assessment crossed her face. "Zarkha Stonefist," she said. "Do not make me regret the association." "I'll try not to," he said. She stood up, picked up a travel pack from behind the rock that he had not seen at all, and walked to the cart. She did not ask permission. She slung the pack into the back, stepped up onto the board beside him with a force that rocked the whole cart on its axle, and sat down. Emmett clucked to the mule, and they moved. The shepherd's track was exactly as bad as he had remembered, and possibly worse. A narrow, rutted path that wound up through low scrub and loose shale before descending again toward the coastal highland that led eventually to the monastery keep at Clasp Bluff. Emmett had made the shepherd's track before in better weather and drier conditions. In the autumn damp it was a slow, grinding ordeal, and the mule made its feelings known at every difficult turn. Zarkha Stonefist sat on the board beside him and said nothing for the first 2 hours, which Emmett appreciated. He had spent long enough on these roads alone that silence felt natural to him. He was aware of her beside him in the close way you are aware of a fire in a room, a constant low warmth and weight that changed the air around it. After the first hour she had braced herself against the cart's lurching with one hand on the board edge, fingers curled over the worn wood, and her knuckle was roughly level with his knee. He noticed her hands. They were not delicate hands. The knuckles were scarred and the palms had the layered callus of someone who had trained with weapons from very young, but the fingers themselves were long and the nails were kept clean. He offered her dried apricots from his bag at mid-morning. She took 2 without comment. He ate 2 himself and they continued. The shale section leveled out onto a narrow highland plateau, and here the view opened up on the left side, the sea visible in a vast gray-green sheet 300 feet below, the horizon line perfectly flat and enormous. The sky was overcast in the way it always seemed to be out here, a solid pale gray that turned the sea silver. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Clasp Bluff," she said. He looked at her. "I know," she said. "Coincidence. What's at Clasp Bluff for you?" She was quiet for a moment. "I need to speak with someone at the old monastery. There is a warlord named Crail working out of the northern highlands. He has been raiding the Stonefist settlements in the upland valleys. My people have been paying his men grain and livestock for 3 seasons to be left alone, and it is not working. Someone told me there is a resistance council operating out of the monastery, people who have been documenting Crail's illegal taxation and land seizures. If I can connect my clan's testimony to their record, we can bring a case to the lowland courts." Emmett thought about this. "You're going to take Crail to court." "I am going to collect the evidence needed to hang him legally," she said, "or if the courts fail, to know exactly where his garrison is." She said the second part in a tone that was entirely level and calm. "How far is Stonefist territory from here?" 4 days north. I have been walking for 9 days. He thought about the wear on her boots, the lean set of her jaw. 9 days alone through mountain passes in the autumn. "And Crail's men are on the roads." "Crail's men and Havorn's men are the same men," she said. "Or at least they share the same roads and the same pockets. One bleeds the coast trade, one bleeds the inland settlements. Both answer to the same arrangement." Emmett thought about the forged decree. Havorn's seal on the wrong corner. He thought about how Dross had not seemed even slightly afraid of any legal consequence when he swung that baton. Immunity from somewhere higher up the chain. "When I get to Clasp Bluff," he said, "I need to sell these barrels. The monastery keep has a trading floor on the lower level. The abbot runs it. He used to, at least, when I last came through 2 seasons ago. Is the abbot part of this resistance council?" "I have no idea," Emmett said honestly. "I just sell him salt." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but a near neighbor to one. They made the highland plateau by mid-afternoon, and Emmett could see the shape of the Clasp Bluff keep on the horizon, a dark bulk of old stone sitting on the edge of the cliff 6 or 7 miles ahead. It was an old Benedictine monastery-style building, 300 years of salt air and wind having eaten the corners off everything, but the walls were still 8 feet thick, and the main keep still rose 4 stories above the outer wall. Somewhere in those upper windows, a light would be burning even now, the signal fire the monks maintained to warn coastal ships off the rocks below. The track descended gently toward the clifftop road that led to the monastery gate, and the wind was cold enough now that Emmett pulled his coat tighter, and the mule tucked its head low. Beside him, Zarkha Stonefist looked at the keep on the horizon with an expression that was all business, all intention. A woman who had walked 9 days through dangerous country and was not going to let anything stop her in the last 7 miles. He noticed that one of the clasps on the left side of her chest piece had worked loose. It was the second clasp from the bottom of the double row, a bent iron staple meant to hook through a leather loop. The loop had stretched over what was probably years of hard use, and the staple was hanging open, the boiled leather at that section pulling slightly away from the buckle beneath. It was a small structural failure, the kind of thing that would not matter until it suddenly mattered very much, a blade edge finding the gap or the whole left buckle system losing tension and leaving her side exposed. He did not plan what he did next. He simply saw a thing that needed fixing, and he reached across the space between them without announcing it, without asking, and pressed the stretched loop back against the staple tongue, working the leather to reseat the hook, and bent the staple end back to its proper angle with the flat of his thumbnail. It took about 8 seconds. Zarkha Stonefist went absolutely still. Not the stillness of surprise, not the flinch of someone not expecting to be touched. Something much more specific. The kind of stillness that happened when a thing that had been wound very tight for a very long time encountered something that it did not have a ready response to. Her hands were motionless on her knees. Her breathing did not change. She was looking straight ahead at the horizon. He finished with the clasp and withdrew his hand. She did not speak for almost a full minute. When she did speak, her voice was exactly as level as before, but there was a quality in it that had not been there before, a very faint, carefully controlled thing, like a note held just slightly longer than normal. "That clasp," she said, "has been loose for 3 days. "I noticed," he said. "You could have asked. You would have looked at me like I was trying to distract you." Another long pause. The mule plodded. The wind came in off the sea. "Yes," she said, "I would have." He did not look at her. She did not look at him. But something had changed in the space between them on that cartboard. Some membrane had thinned that had been there since she sat down, and they both knew it, even though neither of them would have been able to say exactly what it was. The Kareth Bluff Monastery keep came up on them as the last of the gray afternoon light was thinning toward evening. The outer wall gate standing open the way it always stood open. A great iron-strapped oak door that had been locked maybe twice in living memory. 2 monks were bringing in goats from the clifftop pasture as Emmett drove the cart through the gate, and they looked at Zarkha with the carefully neutral expression of people who had spent a long time practicing not reacting to things. The trading floor was on the monastery's ground level, a stone-flagged hall with roof beams black from decades of lantern smoke, lined on both sides with wooden shelving. Brother Aldrich, the abbot's trade keeper, met them at the receiving door. He was a short, thin man in his 50s with ink-stained fingers and the perpetual half-alert look of someone who slept lightly. He took one look at the state of Emmett's face and said, "Dross." "Dross," Emmett confirmed. Aldrich shook his head with the resignation of a man who had heard this name too many times. He directed 2 of the younger monks to help bring in the barrels, noted the bolt hole in the first one, and agreed to take both barrels at the full market rate plus a 10% surcharge that he called a hazard supplement, and that Emmett did not argue with. As Emmett was signing the trade receipt, he watched Zarkha moving along the outer wall of the trading floor, reading the notices pinned there with an attention that was something beyond casual interest. He saw her stop at one notice in particular, a broadsheet printed in the thick, imprecise type of a small press, the heading reading regarding the illegal seizure of Highland common lands by the office of Prefect Halvorn. She read it once, then she read it again. She turned to Emmett. "The Resistance Council," she said. "They're here." Aldrich looked up from the receipt. Something changed in his expression, a very small recalibration, the look of a man deciding how much to reveal. He said carefully, "If you are interested in that broadsheet, I can perhaps arrange an introduction. After supper." The keep takes in road travelers when the passes are difficult. There is room for both of you." Emmett looked at Zarkha. She gave him a minimal nod that somehow carried the weight of a full decision. "After supper," he said. The monastery's great hall smelled of seaweed and roasting root vegetables and tallow candles, and Emmett sat at the long refectory table with Zarkha on one side and a traveling glassblower from Crescik on the other, and ate the best bowl of lamb stew he had tasted in 6 weeks. Zarkha ate with the focused attention of someone genuinely hungry, and he caught himself watching the line of her jaw as she worked, the way the candlelight caught the curve of her tusks and turned them amber gold. He looked away before she caught him. After the meal, Aldrich led them through a low door behind the main hearth, down a half-flight of stairs, and into what had once been a storage cellar. It had been converted into a working room. A long table with 3 lanterns on it. Maps on the wall, marked in red, showing land parcels with names scratched out and Havorn's seal stamped over them. A woman in her 40s with a hard face and careful eyes, a man perhaps 60 with hands like Emmett's own, brine-stained and road-scarred, a younger man who had the ink marks of a copyist. This was the Resistance Council, 5 people in a cellar, working by lantern light. The woman's name was Marta. She was a former port official who had been replaced by one of Havorn's appointments. The old man was Saren, a highland farmer whose land had been seized without compensation 3 seasons ago. The copyist was Ned, who had been running broadsheets for 2 years and somehow had not been caught yet. They looked at Zarkha with the wariness that most people showed initially, the slight drawing back, the quick assessment of the tusks and the sword. But Zarkha sat down at the table and said, in the flat, precise tone she had used all day, "My name is Zarkha Stonefist. I speak for the Stonefist settlements in the Keldavar upland valleys. We have been paying unlawful tribute to Krail's men since 3 seasons past, and I have names, dates, and grain tallies." She took a folded leather pouch from inside her chest piece and laid it on the table. "I have been walking for 9 days to put that in front of someone who can use it." Marta looked at the pouch and then at Zarkha and then at Emmett. "He's a salt trader," Zarkha said, before anyone could ask. "But he knows these roads and Havorn's men know his face. He's also a witness to today's assault and extortion attempt at the Keldavar Pass approach." All of them looked at Emmett now. He had not agreed to be a witness. He had not agreed to any of this. He looked at the forged decree in his coat pocket and thought about the 63 coin that was all he had after 4 months of work, and the baton across his face, and Dross's pleasantly contemptuous expression, and said, "Tell me what you need." They talked until well past midnight. What emerged, pieced together from Zarkha's grain tallies and Marta's seized land records and Ned's broadsheet sources, was a picture of something organized enough to be almost elegant in its corruption. Havorn ran the coast road taxation, skimming 30 to 40% off all trade cargo using forged rate orders. Krail ran the highland settlement extraction, demanding tribute in grain and livestock under threat of raiding, with the raids themselves designed to look like independent orc bandits so that Havorn could publicly deplore them while privately taking his cut. The 2 operations shared a common ledger that Marta had seen once briefly before she was dismissed from her post. That ledger was the key. Everything else they had was compelling but circumstantial. The ledger was proof. "Where is it kept?" Zarkha asked. "Havorn's main garrison," Marta said. "Castle Valnar, 10 miles inland from Keldavar's gate." Everyone at the table looked at the map. "Castle Valnar has 80 men," the farmer Saren said. "Getting in is not impossible," Zarkha said, studying the map. "Getting in with a trader's cart, on the other hand, might actually be easier than any of you are thinking." Emmett looked at her. "Havorn's garrison buys coastal supplies," she said. "Salt, spice. If you were known to those men as a regular supplier who had been shaken down by Dross today and wanted to settle the account privately, they might let you into the courtyard." "You want to use me as a lure," he said. "I want to use your cart as a Trojan gate," she said. "You drive in openly. I am in the back under the oilcloth." I find the ledger room while you conduct trade negotiations at the main receiving door. You leave with your coin. I leave with a copy of the key pages. What if they search the cart? Then I fight my way out, she said, with a simplicity that made it clear this was not bravado but genuine operational calculus. And if there are 80 men? Then I fight 80 men, she said. The amber eyes were steady. I have fought 80 men's worth before, just not all at once. He looked at her for a moment. He believed her. He was not entirely sure whether that was comforting or terrifying. I have one barrel left, he said. The spice crates. If I offer to sell directly to the garrison quartermaster at the same rate I charge the monastery, bypassing the tax entirely, that's an obvious enough profit motive that they will not question it. Marta was nodding slowly. We need those ledger pages, or at minimum a true copy of the shared revenue entries. We go tomorrow, Zarkha said. Early. Dross will have filed a complaint or at least a report by mid-morning. If they flag your cart description before we arrive, the window closes. Emmett said, I need a night's sleep first. Zarkha looked at him, a long look measuring. Yes, she said, you do, you are still bleeding. He touched his cheekbone, which had in fact been quietly throbbing for several hours. Someone had given him a damp cloth before supper, and he had forgotten to use it. Zarkha reached across the table, took the cloth from where he had left it folded next to his elbow, and without any ceremony pressed it firmly to the cut on his cheekbone. He went still under her hand the same way she had gone still under his, a sudden complete arrest of motion, the simple shock of being tended to. She held the cloth there for a moment, assessing the cut. It will not need stitching, she said, but it will be purple by morning. It's fine, he said. She removed the cloth and set it down. She did not look away from him as quickly as she might have. He slept in the monk's cell Aldrich assigned him, a narrow stone room with a straw pallet and one blanket, and a high window that let in the sound of the sea below the cliff. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling and thought about Zarkha Stonefist walking 9 days alone, through dangerous passes, to put a leather pouch of grain tallies on a table in a cellar, and the way she had gone still on the cart board when he fixed her clasp, the way no one had apparently done a small, careful thing for her in long enough that it stopped her entirely. He thought about the plan for the next day and the 80 men at Castle Valnar and told himself he was not afraid. He was, in fact, somewhat afraid. But he had been somewhat afraid on most of the significant mornings of his life and had gotten up anyway, so that seemed fine. In the morning, Zarkha was already at the cart when he came out into the courtyard in the pre-dawn dark, checking the axle and the wheel pins with the methodical attention of someone who had needed to rely on equipment in situations where failure was not recoverable. She had eaten, apparently, because there was a heel of bread crust on the wheel hub. She was resecuring the oilcloth over the remaining spice crates, her movements efficient and quiet. In the gray pre-dawn light she looked severe and very beautiful in a way that made Emmett's chest do something inadvisable. The angle of her jaw, the line of her braid, the way the boiled leather chest piece sat perfectly smooth now that the clasp was properly seated. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Adequately," she said. He checked the mule's harness, found nothing wrong with it because she had apparently already checked it, and climbed up onto the board. They drove out of the monastery gate as the first thin line of light was appearing over the sea to the east, and Zarkha was sitting on the board with her arms on her knees and her sword accessible, watching the road ahead with the focused calm of a woman who had made her decision and was simply executing it now. It was 3 miles to the junction where the shepherd's track met the cliff road, and another 4 miles from there to the garrison road that led to Castle Valnar. The cliff road was deserted in the early morning, the garrison post at Keldavar's gate barely stirring, the 2 visible sentries hunched against the cold and not particularly interested in an outbound cart. Emmett drove past them at a steady pace that communicated nothing remarkable, and they did not stop him. The garrison road cut inland through scrub and low stone wall country, rising slightly toward the castle on its prominence above the coastal plateau. Castle Valnar was not elegant. It was a military fortification, square and blunt, dark stone with wooden watchtower additions showing where it had been expanded and re-expanded by successive garrison commanders. Havorn's gold and gray banner flew from the main tower. There were men visible on the walls. "I am getting under the oilcloth now," Zarkha said. He nodded without looking at her. She climbed into the cart bed with a smoothness that was almost unbelievable for someone her size, settling in between the crates, pulling the oilcloth down. The cart barely moved. She was that controlled about distributing her weight. He heard a single soft metal whisper as she drew her sword a half-inch from the scabbard and let it rest. He drove the last half-mile alone. The gate sentries stopped him at the outer gatehouse. He told them he was Emmett Wells, salt and spice trader out of Voros Harbor, that he had been extorted by Dross's collectors at the pass yesterday, and that he had product he wanted to sell directly to the garrison quartermaster at a fair price that cut out Havorn's road collectors entirely. He said this in the easy, businesslike tone of a man making a commercial proposition, not in the tense voice of a man with an armed orc under his oilcloth. The sentries exchanged a look. One of them went inside. The other watched Emmett with the bored suspicion of a man doing his job imperfectly. The first sentry came back with a heavy-set man in a quartermaster's apron who smelled of bacon fat and had the eyes of someone who saw every transaction as an opportunity. He walked around the cart, looked at the crates, asked about the bolt hole in the barrel, which Emmett explained as a misalignment accident during loading. He nodded at the oilcloth. Emmett's heart did one short terrible thing and then steadied. "Bring it in," the quartermaster said. "We will talk in the receiving yard." The gate opened and Emmett drove the cart in. The inner courtyard of Castle Valnar was a busy, organized space. Men moving between the main keep and the barracks buildings, a farrier working at a portable forge in one corner, supply crates stacked along the inner wall. Emmett guided the cart to the receiving area the quartermaster pointed out and climbed down and began negotiating. He was good at this. He had been doing it since he was 17 years old. The careful calibration of price and patience, letting the buyer feel they had won something without actually conceding anything important. He kept the quartermaster talking. He pointed at things. He offered to break open a crate for inspection. Under the oilcloth, Zarkha moved. He did not see it. He could not have seen it. She had slipped out of the cart over the side facing the inner keep wall, a shadow against shadows, and the only evidence was a very brief, infinitesimal settling of the cart on its axle as her weight left it. He continued to negotiate. 12 minutes later, while he was counting out coin and accepting a fair price for 2 of the 3 spice crates, something in the periphery of the outer yard caught his eye. A soldier walking from the main keep toward the barracks had stopped and was looking at the keep door. Not because of anything alarming, just because the door had opened. A figure came through it, unhurried, wearing the dark green-gray of stone shadows, tucking something inside her chest piece. She walked across the yard with the easy confidence of someone who was supposed to be there, passed within 20 feet of 3 separate soldiers without any of them looking twice, climbed back into the cart from the wheel side, and was under the oilcloth before the last coin changed hands. Emmett pocketed his payment, thanked the quartermaster with genuine warmth, and drove out through the gate at a pace that said everything was entirely normal. He did not exhale fully until the castle walls were 200 yards behind him. When they were half a mile down the garrison road and the mule had settled into its walking rhythm, and there was nothing behind them but empty road, the oilcloth shifted and Zarkha emerged from the cart bed and climbed back onto the board beside him. She was breathing normally. She looked entirely composed. She took a folded sheet of heavy paper from inside her chest piece and smoothed it on her knee. "The shared revenue ledger has a second copy kept in the clerk's room off the main hall," she said, as if she were reporting on weather conditions. "I have transcribed 6 entries covering the last 3 seasons. It shows Havorn's account number, Krail's operational payments, and the name of the lowland magistrate who receives a cut for keeping the courts friendly." He looked at the paper. The handwriting was even and rapid and precise. She had done this in 12 minutes in an enemy garrison. "You are extraordinary," he said, and he meant it with no flattery in it, just the plain factual assessment. She folded the paper with deliberate care and tucked it away. She said, "The magistrate's name on that list is Vorn Adow. He sits on the coastal appellate bench. He is one of 3 who would normally hear a seizure complaint. So we cannot use the courts. We cannot use those courts," she said. "But there is a High Marshal's Circuit Court that operates out of Aldenmere, 2 days south. The High Marshal's office does not answer to Havorn or to the appellate bench. If we can get these documents to them, combined with Marta's land seizure records and my clan's testimonies, they have grounds to send an investigation commission. 2 days south," he said, "through Havorn's road collectors. And possibly Crail's men in the highlands if he hears I have been in this region," she said. He thought about it. He had nothing else to deliver right now. He had already sold most of his cargo. The return run to Voros Harbor could wait. He said, "I know a route south that avoids the main road for the first day. It adds 8 hours, but it comes out at a way station called Thaller's Post, and from there the road to Aldenmere is a main trading trunk. Too many legitimate travelers for Havorn's collectors to work openly." She looked at him. The amber eyes were very level, very direct. He had the sense, as he had had several times now, of being assessed not critically but completely, as if she were reading something about him that went beyond the visible surface. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "Doing what?" "This," she said. She gestured briefly at the road, the cart, the direction of travel. "You have your payment. You have no obligation here. This road leads away from Voros Harbor, not toward it." He thought about it honestly for a moment, because she deserved an honest answer and not a casual one. "I drove this pass for 4 seasons, he said. "Every season Havorn's tax gets higher. Every season the forgeries get sloppier because they don't bother being careful anymore. I've watched 2 other traders I know quit this route because they couldn't make it pay. One of them had a family to feed. Those barrels this morning are all I have until next season if I don't make up the difference somewhere." He paused. "And I watched a man who was doing nothing wrong get hit in the face with a baton this morning, and that man was me, and I am tired of it." Zarkha looked at the road ahead. "Yes," she said quietly. "And," he said, "I think you might actually be able to stop it, which is something I cannot do alone." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Neither can I." She said it like it cost her something, like that particular truth was one she had to reach for deliberately. "I have been trying to do this alone for 9 days. He did not say anything to that. He did not need to. They went back through the monastery to collect Marta and Ned and the full set of land seizure documents. Marta insisted on coming. Ned made 3 additional copies of the ledger transcription on monastery paper and sealed them separately so that if one was lost or seized, the others would survive. Saren, the old farmer, pressed Emmett's hand hard at the gate and said nothing at all, which was its own kind of statement. They set out south in the early afternoon, the cart carrying 4 people and a considerable weight of documentary evidence, and the landscape opened up below the cliff road into the broader highland plain. That evening, they made camp at the head of Emmett's inland route, a hollow between 2 low stone ridges where a fire would not show from the main road. Emmett had done this particular camp before. He knew where the sheltered spot was, where to tether the mule so it could reach the scrub grass. He worked quietly, building the fire low and practical while Marta organized their supply situation, and Ned wrapped the document copies in oilskin against the coming night damp. Zarkha stood at the edge of the ridge, watching the road below for a long time. When she came back to the fire, she sat across from Emmett, close enough to feel the heat, and accepted the tin cup of tea he passed her. They sat in what was by now a comfortable silence. Marta went asleep early. Ned arranged his documents with the fussiness of a man who felt about papers the way other men felt about weapons and turned in shortly after. Emmett sat feeding small sticks into the fire and was aware of Zarkha sitting across from him, not sleeping, amber eyes on the flames. She had her knees drawn up, both arms resting on them, the firelight doing complicated things to the green-gray of her skin and the curve of her tusks. "How long has Krail been working your settlements?" he asked. 3 full seasons, she said. He started with what he called a road fee, 1 bag of grain per month per family for safe passage on the highland roads. Within a season it was 3 bags. Within 2 seasons it was 5 bags and a head of livestock. She paused. "My father said we should refuse in the first season. He was probably right, but we had children and elders and we could not risk a raid, and so we paid and the price went up." "Where is your father now?" "He died last winter," she said. "Not from Krail, from the cold. He was old." She looked at the fire. "I took over as settlement war leader when he died." "How old are you?" 24, she said. "You?" 28. She looked at him across the fire. "You look older." "Road life," he said. "Yes," she said, and he understood from the way she said it that she knew that precisely. "Do you have family in the settlements?" he asked. "An uncle, 2 cousins, 38 other people who are technically under my protection." She said protection the way someone says a word they are working hard to make mean something. A war leader who has not been able to stop what is happening to her people is not much of a war leader. "You walked 9 days alone through passes where Krail's men were active," he said. "That sounds like war leading to me." She looked at him with a different quality of attention. Not the measuring look he had come to recognize, but something more unguarded, briefly, quickly covered. "You are an interesting man, Emmett Wells," she said. "Dull mostly," he said. "Ask anyone who's traveled with me." "Who has traveled with you?" He thought about it. "Nobody recently." She seemed to accept this. She looked back at the fire. He looked at her in the quiet, honest way he had been looking at her all day and trying not to be obvious about. The firelight was warm on the angles of her face, and she was, he thought with a clarity that he was still getting used to, genuinely beautiful. Not the way he had been trained by a lifetime of seeing one type of beauty to recognize it, but in a way that was entirely specific to her, the architecture of her features, the strength in the line of her jaw, the way her amber eyes caught and held light. He looked away before she caught him. He did not think he was fast enough. She said nothing. But when they both lay down by the banked fire to sleep, she had shifted position slightly from where she had been sitting, and the distance between them was meaningfully less than it had been all evening. He did not point this out. He closed his eyes and listened to the wind in the scrub grass and the distant sound of the sea somewhere below the cliffs, and fell asleep faster than he expected. The second day south on the inland route was harder traveling than the first, the ground softer from overnight rain and the cart's wheels wanting to sink into the ruts. Emmett drove and Zarkha sat beside him, and for stretches they talked, not about the mission or Havorn or Krail, but about other things, the kind of things people talk about when they are putting the rest of themselves forward. She told him about the upland valleys in spring, the particular color the grass turned when the frost broke, how the Stonefist settlement had a tradition of the first thaw feast where the best cook in the village made a dish using the first spring greens, and how her father had always won until he got too old, and then she had tried and been roundly beaten by her uncle, who apparently made a cold herb sauce that had no earthly rival. He told her about the coast road in early summer, the window of good weather between the spring storms and the autumn ones when the whole run from Voros harbor to the inland markets was genuinely pleasant, when the cliff face went from iron gray to something almost gold, and the sea had color in it. He told her about a white dog that had followed his cart for 11 miles one summer, and then apparently satisfied with some mystery destination of its own, turned off the road and disappeared. She laughed at this, a real laugh, short and genuine, and he thought it might be the best sound he had heard in a long time. He said without quite meaning to, "I have been doing these roads alone for 4 years. "That is a long time," she said. "It did not feel long until recently," he said. She looked at him and he looked at the mule's ears, and they both understood what he had not said. They reached Thaler's post in the mid-afternoon of the second day, a way station at a road junction that served as a traveler's inn, a small market, and a postal relay point. The main trading road to Aldenmere ran south from here, 2 solid days of good road surface. Emmett paid for stabling and a night room, or rather 2 night rooms, one for Marta and Zarkha and one for himself and Ned. That evening in the way station's common room, there was a fire burning in a wide hearth and a dozen other travelers, mostly merchants in their hands, a couple of highland farmers, and a group of river traders heading for the coast. Emmett bought supper for everyone in their party, and they sat at a table near the fire and ate roasted fowl and dark bread, and a vegetable stew that was better than its appearance suggested. The trouble started with the river traders. There were 4 of them, large young men in the rough clothes of boat workers, and they had been drinking since mid-afternoon by the look of it. One of them had noticed Zarkha when they came in, and had continued noticing her with the increasing volume that came with continued drinking, the kind of attention that was not admiration but its uncomfortable opposite. It started with comments made to each other at their table, just loud enough to carry. Remarks about orcs in way station common rooms. Remarks about the sword she wore. A suggestion, delivered with a laugh, that she must be a hard-pressed establishment to need to serve her kind. Emmett set down his fork. Zarkha had not moved. She was continuing to eat with the deliberate calm of a woman who had made her assessment of the 4 men and found them not worth the energy of a response, but her jaw was set in a way he recognized from the past 2 days. Marta's expression was tightly controlled. Ned was looking at his plate. The loudest of the 4 river traders pushed back from his table, emboldened by his companion's responses to his remarks, and stood up. He was broad, drunk, and the kind of stupid that believed its own boldness. "Oi," he said, toward their table, addressing no one specifically. "We eat here, not with her kind." The common room had gone quiet. The innkeeper was visible at the serving door with the expression of a man calculating whether intervention would cost him more in property damage or trade. Emmett stood up. "Sit down," the trader said to him, not unpleasantly, with the contempt of someone addressing a minor obstacle. "No," Emmett said. "She a pet of yours." He heard Zarkha make a sound low in her throat, the faintest note of something tightly controlled. "She is a person," Emmett said. "Eating her supper, leave it alone." "Human man defending an orc in my face," the trader said, warming to an audience. "That's something." One of the trader's companions had stood up now, working himself up to the same pitch, and a third was reaching for something on the table in that slow pre-commitment way. What happened next happened faster than any of them were ready for. Zarkha Stonefist stood up. She did not reach for her sword. She did not raise her voice. She stood up from the bench to her full height, which was nearly a head taller than the trader who had been doing the talking, and she stepped out from behind the table into the clear floor space between the 2 groups, and she looked at him. He was a large man. He was not a small man by any measure. She was categorically a different scale of thing entirely, and she was very clearly the latter. The loudest trader had a full moment of staring up at her with his mouth slightly open, recalibrating, and then his companion grabbed a chair, the kind of stupid escalation that drunk men make when they have committed to something and cannot find the exit gracefully. The chair swung toward Zarkha. She caught it. She caught it in one hand, mid-swing, stopping it with the completeness of stopping a pendulum, and the impact reverberated up the man's arms hard enough that he lost his grip. She held the chair, suspended, for 2 seconds, which was long enough for everyone in the room to understand what they were looking at. Then she set it down on the floor with a careful, quiet click that was somehow far louder than the crash it could have been. Then she turned to the man who had been speaking. He took a step backward. She said, "I would like to finish my supper." The room was absolutely silent. Every single traveler in that common room, the merchants and farmers and road hands, every one of them was looking at her with the flat, stop-breathing attention of people who had just seen something recalibrate their understanding of what was possible. The 4 river traders were not drunk anymore. That had left rapidly. The main speaker sat down. His companions sat down. The The third one, who had been reaching for something on the table, moved his hand to his cup instead and stared at it. Zarkha walked back to the table and sat down and picked up her fork. The common room slowly, carefully, resumed its noise. Emmett sat back down. Marta let out a breath that she had apparently been holding for some time. Ned was gripping the edge of the table. Zarkha ate a spoonful of stew. Emmett said quietly, with complete sincerity, admirable restraint. She looked at him sideways. The corner of her mouth moved. "I was hungry," she said. The river traders left within the hour without making further eye contact with anyone at the table. That night, Emmett sat outside in the way station's small courtyard for a while, needing the air after the heat and tension of the common room. The sky had cleared and the stars were sharp over the highland plain, and the road south stretched away dark and quiet. Zarkha came out and sat beside him on the courtyard bench, not at a careful distance but simply beside him, the warmth of her arm against his. "You stood up," she said. "Not fast enough to matter," he said. "You were already on your feet." "You stood up before you knew that," she said. "You stood up when it was just you." He was quiet for a moment. "Of course I did." "Most men do not," she said. The words were simple and did not have bitterness in them, just the plain sound of a fact reported accurately. He looked at her. She was looking at the stars, her profile clean and sharp against the dark, and something in her face was open in a way that the daylight hours did not show. The careful composure she wore like a second armor was still present but differently configured, less load-bearing in this specific moment. "Zarkha," he said. She looked at him. He said, "You have been war leader of your settlement for less than a year, and in that time you have walked 9 days alone through hostile passes, broken into an enemy garrison, assembled the documentary foundation for a legal case against a corrupt prefect, and been the most formidable person in every room you've entered. You are doing this for 38 people who are counting on you. That is not a failure of war leading. That is the opposite." She looked at him for a long time with those amber eyes, and in the starlight he could not quite read what was in them except that it was not dismissal. "You see me," she said, not as an observation, as something she was still processing. "Not difficult," he said. "You're not exactly subtle." This surprised a laugh out of her, a real one, the same short, genuine laugh he had heard at the fire 2 nights ago. And then she was looking at him with that open-faced, unguarded thing, and he was very aware that they were close together on this bench, and that the warmth of her arm against his was not an accident. "Emmett," she said. "Yes. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly without performing modesty." "All right." "Do you have a woman, a wife, anyone waiting for you in Voros Harbor or anywhere else?" He thought about this honestly. "No," he said. "There was someone 3 years ago, but we were both better off apart and we knew it. There is no one." She nodded. Then she said, with the same directness she brought to everything, "Good." And she reached up and put her hand against the side of his face, gently, the warm green fingers very careful against the bruise on his cheekbone, and looked at him. He turned his face slightly into her palm, just slightly, an animal instinct toward warmth, toward being touched carefully by someone who meant it. "I have been watching you for 2 days," she said. "Decide something quietly and do it, not making it a show, just doing it because it needs doing." Her thumb moved very slightly. "The clasp," she said. "You did not make a thing of it, you just fixed it." "It needed fixing," he said. "I know," she said. "That is exactly the thing." He covered her hand with his. She did not pull away. The courtyard was quiet around them and the stars were extraordinary, and she was looking at him with those amber eyes that held their light like embers, and he said quietly, "Zarkha." She said yes, in a voice that meant several things at once. He kissed her, not hesitantly. Decisively, the way he drove the cart into the garrison yard, because the moment called for it, and waiting would have been a waste of something true. Her hand pressed against his jaw, and she kissed him back with a warmth and a certainty that told him she had already decided, probably since the fire 2 nights ago, possibly since the clasp, possibly from the moment he stood up in the common room and said the word person. When they drew back, it was not far. He rested his forehead against hers. She was slightly taller than him this way, and he had to tilt his head up to do it, and neither of them found this awkward. She said, low and warm, dangerous thing, Emmett Wells. Is it? He said. You make me want things I had decided were not worth wanting, she said. What things? Company, she said. Specifically yours. I have been working at not wanting company for 4 years, he said. Apparently I am also a failure at that. She made a sound that was half laugh and half something else, and he kissed her again, and the stars did what they always do, which is shine regardless of human or orc concerns, beautifully and without comment. The last 2 days to Aldenmere were the best 2 days of traveling Emmett Wells had done in 4 years, and he would think this later and know it was not the road or the weather, which was ordinary, but the specific company. Zarkha had shifted in some small but definite way on the second morning, a slight relaxing of the careful carriage, a willingness to be close without accounting for it. She sat on the board with her shoulder against his, sometimes in the colder stretches, and told him more about the upland valleys, the Stonefist traditions, the particular problem of upland orc settlements always being treated as a resource to be extracted rather than communities with legal standing of their own. He listened. He asked questions. She appreciated the questions, he could tell, the genuine ones that showed he had heard what came before. He told her about the early years on the road. The first season he had driven the coast pass alone at 19, terrified and stubborn. The second season when he knew enough to be confident. And the third season when he knew enough to be appropriately cautious again. He told her about the mentor he'd had at 16, an old salt trader named Briggs who had died of a chest complaint 2 years ago, and whose route Emmett now ran and whose cart, in fact, had come to him in the inheritance of tools and work, the only inheritance he was ever going to get. She said, "Tell me about the best day you have had on these roads." He thought about it. "Early summer, 3 seasons ago," he said. "I had just sold a full run for good coin, the weather had been kind for 2 weeks straight, and I stopped at a place on the cliff road where there's a wide shelf of rock overlooking the sea. I ate a meal there and watched the light change on the water for about an hour, just that. That was the best day." "Alone," she said. "Alone," he said. He looked at her. "It would have been better not alone." She looked at him with that direct amber gaze and said, "Yes," as if agreeing with something they had both already known. Marta, sitting behind them, said, "Can you two perhaps focus?" in a dry voice that indicated she had been listening for some time, and they both looked straight ahead at the road and said nothing for a moment, and then Emmett made a sound that might have been a laugh and Zarkha's shoulder pressed against his. Aldenmere was a real city, the largest settlement on the southern coast of this region, with an actual stone quay and a covered market, and streets wide enough for 2 carts to pass. The High Marshal's Circuit Court offices were in a solid stone building near the harbor, unremarkable except for the gold seal above the door, the crossed swords and scale of justice that indicated the marshal's authority, which answered directly to the crown and not to any regional prefect. Emmett drove the cart up to the front of the building and they all climbed down, and he stayed with the cart and the mule while Marta, who was the most legally articulate of all of them, led the delegation inside with Ned's document copies and Zarkha's transcription, and the original folded broadsheet from the monastery wall. He stood in the street with his hand on the mule's bridle and waited. Zarkha stood beside him. She did not go inside with the others, which surprised him. "Your testimony is valuable," he said. "You should. I will give mine after," she said. "I need to be here. Here outside. Here," she said, and she was looking at the door of the building with a focused intensity that he recognized as the particular anxiety of someone who had done everything they could and was now in the territory where it was out of their hands. "If they dismiss the case or refuse to hear it, I need to be here to hear it immediately so I know what I am working with." "They will not dismiss it," he said. "You cannot know that. Marta has been building that case for 2 years, he said. Your transcription connects the 2 corrupt operations to a common ledger and names a compromised judge on the appellate bench. The High Marshal's office has been looking for grounds to investigate Havorn for a full year. I heard that from a trader in Creswick 8 months ago. They will hear it. She looked at him, not fully reassured because she was too smart for false reassurance, but steadied. He reached out and took her hand, not a complicated gesture. Just his hand covering hers where it rested on the cart's side panel. She turned her hand under his and held it. They stood like that in the street outside the High Marshal's offices in Aldenmere for the better part of an hour, the mule behind them and the harbor in front, and the sounds of the city going on around them, and did not say much because they did not need to. When Marta came out, her face was controlled and professional, but her eyes were bright in a way that told the story before she spoke. "They are convening a commission," she said. "An investigation commission with warrant authority. They want Zarkha's testimony immediately, your witness statement regarding the assault and forged decree, and Ned's copies lodged with their clerk. The investigator heading the commission leaves for the pass garrison within 4 days. Zarkha's hand tightened on Emmett's. He squeezed back. "The ledger transcription," Marta said, looking at Zarkha. The head clerk said it was extraordinary work, accurate under pressure. She said she had seen professional copyists do worse with twice the time. Zarkha nodded once, shortly, and then turned her face away for a moment, and Emmett saw the line of her jaw work briefly, and thought that what he was seeing was someone who had walked 9 days alone through dangerous country, and broken into an enemy garrison, and kept every single piece of herself controlled and together for the people who depended on her, finally standing somewhere it was beginning to work. He let go of her hand and put his arm around her shoulders instead, drawing her in, and she allowed it, leaning slightly, not much, just enough. They spent 2 more days in Aldenmere giving testimony, signing documents, and being subjected to the patient and thorough attention of the commission's senior investigator, a lean woman named Rose, who had the affect of someone who had seen every variant of governmental corruption, and was personally offended by all of it. She asked precise questions and made precise notes, and at the end of Zarkha's testimony said, in the offhand way of someone stating a certainty, "The Stonefist settlement levies will be returned. That is not in question anymore. The question is only what level of criminal statute we apply to Crail and Havorn." Zarkha walked out of that building into the afternoon light with the expression of someone coming up from a long time underwater. Emmett was waiting outside with 2 cups of tea from the market stall across the street. He had been waiting for an hour. He handed her one. She took it. She stood in the low afternoon light of the Aldenmere harbor front, looking at the water, holding the cup. 38 people, she said. "Yes," he said. "They will get their grain back," she said. "Crail will be removed. The settlements will be able to use the highland roads without paying tribute." She was saying it carefully, each item separately, as if testing the reality of each one. "My father would have," she stopped. "He waited. He would have been so angry that I paid for 3 seasons," she said, and her voice was not quite even on this, "and so pleased that it is over." "Both things can be true," Emmett said. "Yes," she said, "they can." He stood beside her and drank his tea, and she drank hers, and the harbor was very beautiful in the afternoon light, and neither of them said anything for a while because they were both feeling several things simultaneously, and the silence was large enough to hold all of them. Later, as the light was going gold and the harbor took on the amber warmth of evening, they sat on a stone bench on the quay and watched the fishing boats come in, and Emmett was aware that something in the next few minutes or hours was going to determine a direction that was not just about the road to Voros Harbor and the road to Stonefist territory, both of which led different ways from this city. Zarkha set down her cup and said, "I need to go back to my settlements." "I know," he said. "They need to know what happened here. The commission will send word, but I need to be there. I need to tell them myself." "Of course you do," he said. She looked at him. "You need to go back to Voros Harbor for your next cargo run." "Eventually," he said. "Eventually." "I do not need to go tomorrow," he said. She was quiet. He said, "The road north from here goes through the highland plateau. I know that road. I can take the cart as far as the Keldavar Junction, and from there the Stonefist Valley is 4 days on foot." He paused. It is 4 days on foot for someone traveling alone. With the cart it would be 5 days, but you would not be walking." She looked at him steadily. The amber eyes were doing the thing they sometimes did, holding more than was visible on the surface. "Emmett," she said. "Zarkha. You would drive 4 days out of your way, 5 with the cart to take me home." "Yes," he said, "and then you would turn around and drive back to Voros Harbor." "That was the less pleasant part of the plan," he said. "I was working on that." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "What were you working toward?" He looked at her directly. He had always looked at things directly. He said, "I do not want to go back to the road alone. I have been alone on those roads for 4 years, and I was willing to be, because I had not met anyone I wanted on them with me. I have met someone now." She was very still. The amber eyes did not leave his face. "The Stonefist settlements are in the highlands," he said. "The highland settlements need trade. Salt, spice, basic coastal goods. Nobody runs that trade currently because nobody wants to drive the mountain roads. I drive the mountain roads. The run from Voros Harbor north to the Keldivar Junction and then up into the highland valleys is a circuit that has never been run because there was no point of contact at the other end worth making the run for." He held her gaze. "There is now." "You are describing a trade arrangement," she said. "I am describing an excuse," he said. "The trade arrangement is real and profitable and would benefit your settlements, but it is an excuse. What I am actually describing is that I want to stay near you, if you want that. I'm not sure of your position on the matter, and I would very much like to know it." Zarkha Stonefist looked at him for what felt like a long time. She said, "You fixed a clasp on my armor that you had no obligation to fix. It was loose," he said. "You stood up in a way station common room when 4 men were deciding whether to make an example of me," she said. "You did not need me to," he said. "I know," she said. "You did it anyway." She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, eyes level with his face from very close. "In orc courtship tradition," she said, her voice low and warm and direct, "a man who tends to a warrior's armor without being asked is making a statement." He was aware of his heartbeat. "What statement?" he said. "That he considers her safety his concern," she said. "That he sees her as worth protecting even from small things. That he is putting himself in proximity to her well-being." She held his gaze. "It is not a small statement." "I did not know that," he said. "I know," she said. "You did it because it needed doing, which makes it more the statement, not less." He said very quietly, "Zarkha." "Yes," she said, the same word as before, warm and decided. He reached up and put his hand along her jaw, and she turned into it slightly, the same way he had turned into hers 2 nights ago in the way station courtyard. He felt the smoothness of her skin, the warmth of her, the slight edge of the lower tusk against his wrist. "I have no keep," he said. "No land. I have a cart, a mule, a trade route, and 63 coin left over from a difficult week. I have 38 people depending on me and a war leader's responsibility I never asked for," she said. "We are not competing for stability. I want to be someone worth staying for," he said. "You already are," she said, without hesitation, as if it were the simplest fact in the world. "That is not the question. The question is whether you want to stay." "I want to stay," he said. She kissed him. It was different from the courtyard kiss, which had been a beginning. This was a claiming, the kind of kiss that a woman gives when she has decided something completely and wants no ambiguity about it. Her hand came up and held his face, and he held her face, and the harbor was behind them going slowly dark, and the fishing boats were coming in and the lights were coming on in the buildings along the quay. And Emmett Wells, who had been alone on the coast roads for 4 years and had made his peace with it, discovered that he had never been further from peace with it than he had thought. When she drew back, she did not go far. Her forehead against his, amber eyes warm and close, her breath against his face. "You are mine," she said, "if you want to be." "I want to be," he said. She made a sound against his jaw that was low and warm and certain, and he turned his face into her hair and held her in the evening air on the Aldenmere quay, and thought that this was, without any question, the best moment of his 28 years. They spent that night in the same room at the way station on the harbor road. which was a decision they arrived at without drama, simply the natural outcome of two people who had been circling each other's warmth for 5 days and had now stopped pretending it was anything but what it was. He was nervous, briefly, the specific nervousness of wanting to be enough, and she had read this with the same accuracy she seemed to bring to all assessments of things and had said, against his ear, "I have wanted you since the second hour of the cart," which managed to be both flattery and the most direct thing anyone had ever said to him, and the nervousness had dissolved into warmth that was better than anything the road had given him in 4 years. She was strong, more than strong, and careful with it. Careful with him in the way that a very powerful person is careful with something they genuinely value, and he found in her an openness he had not expected from the woman who had sat against the cliff face in the Keldavar Pass shadow and looked at everything with those flat measuring eyes, a warmth that was entirely reserved, it seemed, for this specific proximity, and that she gave to him with a completeness that left him with no doubt at all that she meant it. In the morning they lay in the light that came through the harborside window, and she was on her side looking at him, and he was looking at the ceiling and then at her, and she said, "The trade circuit. Tell me how it works." He told her. She asked specific questions about timing and cargo capacity and the condition of the highland roads, and whether the mule could make the steeper passes fully loaded. He answered all of them. She asked about the market for coastal salt in upland settlements specifically, and he walked her through the pricing logic and the demand model, and she said at the end of this, "It works." "Yes," he said. "You will need someone who knows the highland settlement routes," she said. "The approaches to each settlement, who the trading contacts are, what the current demand is." "I will," he said. "I know those routes," she said. "I know," he said. "A war leader who can also guarantee the safety of a trade cart through the highlands would be a considerable asset to the operation," she said. "She would be," he said. "The trade cart would be a considerable asset to the settlement's recovery," she said. "It would," he said. "This is therefore mutually beneficial and entirely logical," she said. "Entirely," he said. "And separate from the fact that I have decided to keep you," she said. "That too," he said. She looked at him with that open amber gaze, warm and unguarded and entirely certain, and he reached up and tucked a loose strand of her braid back from her face, and she caught his hand and held it there for a moment, and they were both smiling, which was not an expression he had done much of in 4 years and which felt, it turned out, like a thing his face had been waiting to do. Marta and Ned were heading home through different routes. Marta back to her seized land on the coast to wait for the commission's work. Ned back to the monastery to print a final broadsheet documenting the High Marshal's commission and distribute it before Havorn could spin the narrative. They said their farewells at the Aldenmere city gate. Marta pressed Zarkha's hand and said, "Come back when it is done. I want to see your settlement when it is free." She looked at Emmett. "You take care of her." "She takes care of herself," Emmett said. "And you take care of her," Marta said, with the tone of a woman who knew the difference between the two things. Ned pumped Emmett's hand and told Zarkha she was the most impressive person he had ever met in a cellar, which he seemed to feel was high praise, and they parted at the gate with the kind of warmth that comes from having done something real together. The road north from Aldenmere was 3 days to the Highland Junction, longer on the trade road but easier surface, and they drove it with the cart and the mule and the kind of conversation that happens when two people have crossed through danger together and come out the other side and are still choosing to be side by side. They talked about things they had not talked about yet, about the nature of her father's leadership and what she wanted to do differently, about whether the Stonefist settlements might become a formal trade waypoint on a recognized highland circuit, the kind of thing that required a charter and documentation, and the political work that came after legal victories. About the taste of the coastline in summer versus the taste of the highland valleys in spring. About small things too, about the things that made each of them laugh, and the things they could not tolerate, and the things that they had each privately decided they were never going to have. On the second evening, camped in a river bend that Emmett knew from 4 years of roots, he made a better fire than usual because he had bought actual hardwood at a Aldenmere market and not just gathered scrub, and they had bought cooked food from a road vendor that was still warm, and they sat in the proper firelight eating well, and Zarkha said, out of nothing, "I thought about the clasp for the rest of that day." He looked at her. "After you fixed it," she said, "I kept thinking about it. I knew it was loose. I had known for 3 days. I had intended to fix it when I stopped for the night." She paused. "Nobody has fixed something for me without being asked in a very long time." "Not since my father." "Zarkha," he said, "I am not saying it to make you sad," she said. "I am saying it because I want you to understand what it was, a small thing. Nobody would write a song about it." She looked at him directly. "It was the most seen I had felt in 3 years." He held her gaze. He said, "I am going to fix things for you for as long as you will let me." She looked at him with those steady amber eyes for a long moment, and then she said, "I fix things too." "I know," he said. "I am counting on it." She came around the fire to him, and he moved to make room, and she sat against him, her back against his chest, both of them facing the fire, his arms around her, and she was heavy and warm and completely solid, and he thought that he had spent 4 years learning to be comfortable with the weight of nothing beside him, and that this, by comparison, was better in every way that mattered. "I want to take you to the valley in spring," she said, "when the grass changes color." "Yes," he said. "And I want to come with you to the coastal road in summer," she said, "to the place where you ate your meal and watched the light." "Yes," he said. "I am going to be in the way constantly," she said. "I have opinions about cargo loading and road conditions, and I am going to voice them." "I have spent 4 years having no one to voice opinions at me," he said. "I am prepared to be in favor of this." She made a sound against him, warm and half-laughing, and turned her face up, and he pressed his mouth to her temple. And the fire was very good, and the night was very clear, and somewhere below the highland ridge, the river was running fast over stones with the particular sound of water that is going somewhere, and does not need to be asked why. The Keldavar Highland Junction appeared on the third day, the familiar fork in the road where the coast track split off toward the pass, and the Highland Road climbed north into the valley country. Emmett had passed this junction 100 times and turned south every time. He turned north. The Highland Road was harder on the cart than the coast roads, narrower and steeper, and with the kind of surface that required attention at every switchback. Zarkha knew every turn. She told him before each difficult section what to expect and how to handle it, and he listened and did what she said, and the cart and the mule managed all of it. The Stonefist Valley opened up on the second day of the Highland climb, a long green shelf cut into the mountain face, with a cold river running through the middle and stone and timber buildings scattered along both sides, smoke rising from the cookfires, and a scattering of livestock on the lower slopes. It was small. It was real. They saw the cart coming down the Highland Road from a long way off, and several figures came out to watch it approach. By the time Emmett drove the cart through the outer edge of the settlement, there were perhaps 20 people gathered, and they were all looking at Zarkha. An older man, Emmett thought the uncle, came forward first. He looked at Zarkha with an expression that was very controlled and had several things in it that were not controlled at all, and he said, "You were 9 days overdue." "I was making progress," she said. "We thought he started." "I know," she said. "I am here." He looked at her for another moment, and then he pulled her into a hug that she allowed for exactly 3 seconds before patting his back twice and stepping back with the faint discomfort of a war leader accepting public tenderness. The people around them had the expression of people exhaling. She turned to the gathered settlement and said, in a voice that carried cleanly across the Stone Valley, "The High Marshal's Commission has been convened. Havorn's road collections are under investigation. Crail is under investigation. An investigator with warrant authority left Aldenmere 3 days ago. Your tribute grain will be returned. The Highland roads are yours again." Silence for a moment. Then a sound went through the gathered people that was not quite a cheer, too raw for that, too personal. It was the sound of people who had been very afraid for a very long time learning that they could stop. Zarkha stood in the middle of it and looked at Emmett, who was still on the cart board. He held her gaze and said nothing because nothing needed saying, just looked at her steadily the way he always did, and she looked back with those amber eyes warm and direct, and the settlement around them made its sound of relief and held each other, and none of it required his participation except to be there. Later, when the settlement had heard the full account and asked all their questions, and when food had been put on the fire and the uncle had shaken Emmett's hand, with the grinding grip of a man who meant more than a handshake, and when the daylight had gone down to the long highland dusk, Emmett sat on the stone wall above the settlement river and looked at the valley. Zarkha came and sat beside him. "The trade circuit," she said. "Yes," he said. "I spoke with my uncle," she said. "The settlement has a storage building near the North Road that has not been used since the tribute began. It could serve as a way station for trade cargo, a proper receiving facility. That would make the circuit financially sound," he said. "I would have a point of sale and a safe storage at the highland end. The run becomes viable as a regular route, not just a one-time thing." "It becomes your route," she said. "Our route," he said. She looked at him. Then she looked at the valley, the river catching the last light, the cookfire smoke, the settlement that was hers to protect. She said quietly, "My father built this settlement's first storage building. He spent 2 seasons on it. The first trader who used it was a salt merchant from the coast." He looked at her. "I am not a superstitious person," she said. "No," he agreed. "But some things have a shape to them," she said. He turned to look at her. The dusk light was that deep amber rose of highland evenings, and it was extraordinary on her, on all the green and gray of her skin and the warm ivory of her tusks and the dark of her braid against her neck. "Stay tonight," she said. Not a question, not exactly an invitation either, a decision shared. "Yes," he said. She looked at him the way she had looked at him across the fire in the way station cellar in Aldenmere, that direct, warm, certain look of a woman who had made up her mind and was not interested in uncertainty. She put her hand on his jaw the way she had at the way station courtyard, both hands now, tilting his face up to hers. "You came all this way," she said. "It was not far enough," he said. She kissed him in the highland dusk above the valley, thorough and warm and certain, and he kissed her back with everything he had, which turned out to be more than he had known he possessed. And the river ran below them in the stone, and the cookfires burned, and the settlement that was hers went about the first evening of its freedom, and they sat together on the stone wall above it all, choosing each other without conditions, without reservation. In the particular clean air of a highland valley in autumn that smelled of cold water and green stone and wood smoke, and were not, either of them, alone anymore. The valley filled with stars as the night came fully in, and the sound of the settlement below them was warm and human and close, and Zarkha's hand was in his, and she was looking at the stars with an expression he had never seen on her face before, something entirely at rest, the long-wound tension of a war leader carrying everything alone finally, simply, put down. He watched her face, and she felt him watching and turned and looked at him, and her expression did not change. It stayed open and at rest, and she said very quietly, "I was not expecting you." "No," he said. "Neither was I. You came out of the road like something I did not plan for," she said. "A merchant with a bolt hole in his salt barrel," he said. "And a loose clasp on my armor," she said, and she was smiling, and it was the fullest smile he had seen from her yet, and he thought he would drive every mountain road on the coast for the rest of his working years if it meant he got to see it regularly. "I am going to fix every loose thing I encounter," he said. "I want that understood." "I know," she said. "I am counting on it." He squeezed her hand, and she leaned against him, the enormous warm weight of her, and they sat together under the highland stars and the valley breathed below them. And it was enough. It was exactly enough. It was everything.